Yeah, so I would come in to defend Solo Leveling. Anyway, who doesn't want to fucking suddenly become hot and like...
I'll take it.
That sounds sick.
So I never thought we'd have an episode where Charlotte's defending male power fantasy storytelling, but here we are.
I am basic. I like Solo Leveling. Fucking sue me.
Well, hello, and welcome back to Gateway to Anime. How are you all? What's going on? We are the podcast where we try and throw open the gates to anime, whether you are a new fan, a returning fan, or an old grizzled fan like us. So, Charlie, how you going?
Good. Here. Another week, another episode of Gateway to Anime. So, yeah. Indeed. Always a pleasure.
Goddamn, another episode of Gateway to Anime.
You that well, are you, Graeme?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yep,
yeah,
feeling good? Feeling powerful?
Feeling strong. Ready to talk about the 2D page.
Indeed. You were first brought on this podcast as the Manga Man. The Manga Boy, as we called you, but that's kind of weird. So, the Manga Man himself. But we are talking today not about a Japanese cultural product. We are talking about a Korean cultural product, manhwa, and webtoons, and the adaptations which are inevitably happening, one of the big ones is happening right now, which is, of course, the adaptation of Solo Leveling. Now, I guess let's talk a bit about this. So before we dive too deep into this, one of you please explain to people who might not be aware, what is manhwa, what is a webtoon? Just go ahead and explain basically what that is.
So yes, if you're aware of what a manga is, that is a Japanese version of, I guess, a comic book. Don't come for me, but that's kind of what we associate that with. And this is a Korean version, so manhwa. Main differences between manga and manhwa are that they are read differently. So you will read a manhwa from left to right, and you will also most of the time read it in color and on your phone. So they are quite different. Whereas traditionally manga is obviously book form, or it was online, it's in black and white release. Webtoons are often, and manhwa. So I say webtoon because that's the platform that is the main platform that it's released on. There's a couple of other releasing websites, but you can call it Webtoon because that's like the main one. But manhwa, webtoon, often on phones in color, and yeah, a lot more like kind of more like easily accessible for phones and apps and designed to be read that way as opposed to manga. So yeah, they're quite different actually, but a lot of the stories share similarities.
Long format scrolling. I always say it's like the TikTok of reading, because it tends to be, not as heavily wordy as a lot of other stuff. It is very visually striking, but their physical presses are more akin to like Western comics.
Right.
So you're reading left to right, down, rather than the opposite way.
Of course.
But I think that's about the real differences is the digital stuff tends to be long format scrolling.
Now, you are both big manhwa and webtoon consumers, correct?
Yeah.
No.
Not anymore?
No.
Really? I thought you were a big webtoon guy.
I dip in and dip out. But I find that the sort of the stuff that I am drawn to is kind of like in the realm of the shonen type vibe. And I just don't think, don't come from here, but I don't think that the sort of stuff that's aimed for like a younger demographic is as good as Japanese stuff. Like I think the romance side of things, I think all those other things are fantastic, but the stuff that's aimed for me is always a reincarnation act. It's always, I am a low powered dude and I'm going to be super powerful by doing nothing. So I have sort of slipped away because I don't have a lot of the same groups or people I know that have read manga for decades to point in the right direction, because it is kind of like a newish thing. So the stuff I tend to see is, again, power fulfillment, and then a weird thing will pop out of nowhere and I'll be obsessed with it and I'll finish it in like a day.
I agree with that. I spend a lot of time reading drama and thriller and psychological thriller and horror webtoon manhwas, which I think are incredible.
Oh, yeah.
So that kind of space is like, and obviously like there are so many tropes and there's just so much of it coming out. And there's like, every 5 seconds you'll find the same reincarnated story. A villainess is like, there are so many isekai reincarnations in the manhwa space, and that can get overwhelming and kind of like a bit boring and derivative. Absolutely. Yeah. But I think in terms of drama and those genres, romance, there's actually just so much that's coming out, and we'll get onto this later, but there's actually been so many adaptations to live action that have been based on manhwas and webtoons. And I think that a lot of those tend to lend themselves towards the drama, romance, horror, like that sort of thing. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and it is quite different from manga. I think the tropes are different anyway.
I think it's probably just an age thing. I feel like it just hasn't had the time to create the body of work that manga has or like Western comics has. I feel like it's, as you'll go into the history of it, it's had less time to like really fill out. Yeah. And to have those classics. I mean, I've got a few that I absolutely adore, but I just feel like they're few and far between.
Yeah, I think because it's new. I also think it is kind of its own style though, which I like. Like it is actually differentiating itself from manga quite.
Oh yeah, totally.
Like with its own set of tropes, its own set of things. So it just depends if that's your style or not. I think saying like the phone thing, I think the accessibility means that I read a lot because I have that app on my phone and I can just go like this as opposed to trying to get a manga, like even, I know there's apps for that kind of thing. It's a little bit. But it's
still like one page condensed down into a tiny, it's not the best, the easiest format to read. Yeah. Same with Western comics, like everyone's tried it. It just doesn't fit the phone.
They've absolutely nailed the my ADHD generation in that way. Seriously. And it's like, absolutely. And there's some really great ones, particularly some really good romance.
Well, it's interesting because from what I read, the first like official webtoon was something called Uninhabited Island by Hang Hee-jak in 1996. So not that compared to obviously manga, much older. I mean, manhwa goes back, obviously.
Of course.
But like when we're talking about the specifically made for
published
phones, well, obviously phones wasn't phones then. It was obviously just desktops and the internet, and I'm sure it was very slow and very difficult to navigate. 1996, obviously, but the fact that it's morphed into phones, and I mean, there's also web novels are huge in Japan as well. Obviously, I'm pretty sure Sword Art Online started as such, and I mean, this isn't unique to Korea, obviously, and there are a lot of similarities between manga and manhwa, obviously, and some key differences, of course. But what are some of the big differences that you've seen in the style of storytelling? Like, obviously, the villainess thing's a big thing, but you see that in anime and manga as well, like Bakarina and whatnot. You know, these sorts of stories. But how do you think the romance side of things differs, or is it sort of from the same place?
I'd say that, and this is like, obviously there's a lot in terms of what's English translated and easily accessible. What I've seen a lot more of is like adult romances. I don't mean porn. Although there's heaps of porn webtoons out there. Like not on Webtoon, but like there's a whole there's a whole like website. Actually, I forgot what it's called. It's in like a whole streaming, not stream. What's the word I'm looking for? Like a actual
hosting, but
like it's an actual app. It's not like a pirated thing that people are just and it's got adult content and like, so there's a lot of like made for female consumers adult porn that is webtoon or manhwa. There's actually heaps of that, which is interesting because that's not necessarily like that in hentai. There's heaps of hentai, but it's not often targeted at that demographic, one might say traditionally. There's probably heaps of it. I just know that this isn't a world that I'm familiar with. I don't even go that up. I feel like I'm really trying to.
You're really backpedaling. I don't even own a phone.
There was no. So I think that the ones that I would say just in abundance, there's a lot of similar things in terms of also, but like high school romances are obviously a thing, but there's actually heaps of like workplace romances and college students and things like that. And also just because you're dealing with slice of life, you're dealing with slice of life in Korea and it is inherently different. So there's a lot of things, a lot of messages, a lot of things are just really different in tone coming through. I also think there's a lot more like psychological horror.
Yeah.
Manhwas than there are mangas, and I could be absolutely crucified for that statement. I know that I mean currently, no, I don't mean like historically, I mean that are coming out right now
as we speak,
and that tend to deal a lot more in like real world sort of as in current modern contemporary stuff. I think there's a lot of romance, drama, thriller, and I'll talk about some of my favorites later. There's some really fucking good ones in there and creepy as fuck as well. Some real creepy artwork going on.
Well, that is very interesting actually, because as we found out when we did a horror episode a year or two ago now, we found out there isn't as much horror anime as you would think, right? There really isn't. I mean, obviously we've got Uzumaki Junji Ito's seminal masterpiece coming out. We're hoping it's going to be a good adaptation. We have a video on YouTube you can check out if you want to get more information about that. But basically, there isn't as much, considering that Japanese horror is a classic genre, live action, a classic genre, obviously, especially in that late 90s, early 2000s with The Ring and The Grudge and
yeah.
all those sorts of, classic horror films. But as we found out, obviously not as much in the manga and anime. I mean, more manga than there is anime. But so there's a ton. By the way, full disclosure, not a manhwa webtoon guy, pretty much at all. So I'm going to lean heavily on you guys here. So excuse my ignorance. So I'm going to be asking a lot of questions.
Yeah, there's a lot, but honestly, a lot of them are more psychological and to do with like relationships or like stalkers or abusive partners or that kind of thing.
Interesting.
Or like people who turn out to be like there's one I just finished reading called Chasing Tales, which I really hope someone turns into a Netflix TV show. And I say that because there are so many, like Hellbound is one that got adapted. There are just so many, and like that they've done as live action, because I think it does lend itself to that. And I think that, and we'll talk about why some of the adaptations to traditional anime haven't been as successful. Yes. I think it's because they are quite different mediums, even though they have shared similarities, and maybe the beats that we're used to are not quite there with them, I think. And I think that they lend themselves quite well to dramas. Whereas I would say that like a lot of the shoujo manga that I read probably wouldn't make an amazing drama. You know what I mean? Like it wouldn't kind of work as well. Whereas the stuff that I read for Webtoon or Manhwa, like things like Cheese in the Trap, it's like a classic. It's a really amazing adaptation set in college. It's amazing, except I just can't deal with like, there's a thing that honestly, it's called the second lead male syndrome. And it's a thing that I think also happens in J-dramas and K-dramas and all these kind of things. But like, it's just where the second lead male in the love triangle is just so much better than the first. And it's painful. And it happens all the fucking time. And I'm always like, just like, because you know pretty quickly when you're across these tropes. And obviously, a lot of this stuff that I'm going to recommend is guilty pleasure reading. It's like TikTok, like, so you read it and you go like, similar, I think Solo Leveling is a guilty pleasure read. Like, you're kind of like, this is just scratching that itch.
It's just a hype.
It's a hype thing. And also some of the art in manhwa is freaking incredible. And it's lovely to see things in color, and just, it's a really,
full
it's
digital,
so,
lens flares, fades.
But yeah, honestly, I mean, obviously, I'm on an anime podcast, so obviously I have more of a connection with manga and anime and that kind of thing. But I just think it's really cool to see other stories and other ways of presenting comics and that kind of thing that's keeping up with modern times and coming to your phone and like coming with that. I think it's really cool to see. And, Korea, they know what's up.
Well, absolutely they know what's up. I mean, at the moment, Korea is pretty much one of the most ubiquitous cultural exporters in the world. I mean, you cannot go anywhere without seeing Korea dominating in a cultural product sphere. I mean,
Apart
obviously
from Scotland, obviously, with
well,
Highlander came out in 1989, is still relevant.
still holding on,
Still
baby.
got it.
Isn't Henry Cavill
He's bringing it back.
bringing it back?
So happy.
He's not Scottish
hallelujah.
though.
Christopher Lambert was French. Sean Connery played a Spanish person working for an Egyptian pharaoh. Like, nothing means anything anymore.
Well, as we're learning, transnationalism is a whole thing now.
Exactly.
Again, we'll get onto the adaptations, the anime adaptations of manhwa soon. But I mean, obviously, Squid Game, the biggest series on Netflix ever, the most watched series on Netflix ever.
Because we're all trapped in our homes, though.
Yeah, there's like
Coming out, season 2.
Certain thing. Season 2 coming out very soon.
I will be watching it. Absolutely.
Very
Of course, we'll all be watching it, like no doubt. But obviously, of course, we had Parasite winning the first ever non-English language film to win Best Picture.
Yeah.
It's honestly just it's like probably the best movie ever made.
It's extraordinary,
Like-
right? At the moment, obviously, anyone who hasn't heard of BTS, and I'm not talking about behind the scenes footage, I'm talking about the K-pop band who are
What does BTS stand for?
Probably behind the scenes, right?
probably behind the scenes. Good question.
I have no idea. I love them.
Yeah, I mean, they're amazing at what they do. And at the moment, the K-pop girl group Twice, that's the name of the band or group, Twice, number 1 album on the US Billboard charts. But interestingly, I would say that even though manhwa is never been bigger and Webtoons couldn't be more huge, but it is still lagging behind the rest. I mean, obviously it's a smaller
Much smaller platform.
Much
It's
smaller
not pop
platform.
music.
Obviously, the pop music and film and food, obviously. But just to compare it with the manga industry, I don't want to do a comparison, but just for interest sake, I think it is quite interesting. The current Webtoon market is worth $368 million US, but the current manga market is worth $4.7 billion. So like, it's a huge difference, right? So, but it's still never been bigger. And speaking of that, I suppose we should talk about some of the adaptations that have happened in the last few years. There's been a lot of hype around these things. The biggest hype, of course, at the time of recording this episode, we are just coming to the end of the winter 2024 season. And of course, Solo Leveling, which I've already mentioned, has been one of the talking points, and not necessarily for the better. I think a lot of people have been criticizing it. A lot of people have found it to be pretty average.
Didn't you love it?
I initially, and again, I haven't read it. You had read it, Graeme,
Yeah.
obviously. You'd read the whole thing.
Yeah.
I initially was like, when it started, I mean, apart from that ridiculous cliffhanger in the first episode, how could they possibly have done such a thing? Like, that's A1 doing a bad adaptation.
Let's not talk about episode 7.5 either.
The most downvoted episode in Crunchyroll history.
I
Yeah,
was
because why? It was episode 7. We don't need a recap.
It was
Yeah.
a terrible decision, yeah. The mess. For those of you who don't know, they obviously had a bit of time issues. Happens a lot, as we've talked about in this podcast a lot. Happens a lot in the anime
Honestly, just
industry.
don't air it.
don't air it.
But like, just take a week off. Instead, they gave us a 7.5 episode, which was just a recap, and people were pissed, dude. Very unhappy people out there. It was trash, but I will say that I started watching Solo Leveling, and the second episode, I was like, wow, that's awesome. And I was watching more stuff, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. It's, again, as you mentioned before, scratching an itch. It's doing but I mean, I've seen enough Japanese. It's not an isekai. Well, it has elements of isekai.
It's not reverse
to it,
isekai. It's like the things have opened up to our world.
Yeah. So it's a reverse isekai vibes, but like, I've seen enough
Power fantasy.
male power fantasy stories in Japanese media to not get anything new from this. Apart from how stylized it is very stylish. It's very cool.
I fully disagree.
How so?
Well, I
How's it
think
different to Overlord?
I haven't seen Overlord, but is that like, it's the opposite way. I like that it still happens in our world, and I think that like all of the screen stuff, I like all that. I think that's very manhwa.
Yeah,
The
but
video game screen happening there
right
and
there.
discovering things. Like, I think that is actually very
happens on Overlord too.
in the world that he's in.
No, he's isekai. He's not in the real world.
Yeah.
But he's still playing a video game essentially, and just he starts as a god. But I'd also argue that his journey to being a fucking unstoppable force is very fast. Like, as I was talking to Gerald about it, who'd also read and it was like, in the first few episodes, it was like, oh, that's right. I remember how much I love this. How good is this? But after that first fight, he literally never loses again. And it's pretty boring. And that's my big problem with male power fantasy stories. Overlord suffers from it. Sword Art Online suffers from it. It's just this thing where it's like, oh, and I will never lose. And so that, as a result, the stakes aren't high. Because I look at it, I'm like, well, he's just going to win in a cool way. And then I watch it, I'm like, that was cool, but
It
I was
was cool.
never worried about it.
It's pretty cool.
It's
though.
cool.
Is
Pretty
it?
cool.
Yeah.
It's cool, but it's all
I'm here to
right.
defend Solo Leveling because I don't think that this story is going to change any of our lives. There's
No.
but I think that what it is doing is it's fun. It's
I don't hate
cool
it.
looking. And I also really like the mechanics of how that world works. And I like the guild thing. And I like the fact that he had a second awakening. And I like the fact that he
But it's
didn't
not a
ever
second
had-
awakening though, is it?
Well, no, he gets a second chance at the game. But the
because
game,
a player, it's a whole different thing.
yes, but that's what I mean. It's a second awakening because he dies and he wakes up again.
Second awakening is a different thing, which they keep thinking that he has, but he's not actually having that.
No, but he does have, yes, okay, not in the terms of what they said, but it is a second awakening of sorts. He gets
He hacks the whole system, basically.
Gets resurrected. Yeah. But yeah, I like the idea that he's been living this world having a hard time and now he's got this power and he's figuring it out. It's kind of fun to see how the system works, And yeah, it reminded me weirdly enough, actually, now I've mentioned the screen thing coming up, is the vending machine one. I think the closest thing to Solo Leveling
Is the vending
the
machine?
vending machine.
It's pretty true.
Like, I actually
Really true.
reckon they're really similar. And I'm here for it.
Or I reincarnated
As a
into
vending machine.
as a slime as well.
Oh, as a slime, yeah.
Same mechanic as well.
Yeah, true.
But
Anyway,
anyway, who doesn't want to fucking suddenly become hot and like
I'll take it.
that sounds sick.
So I
what I took
never
away from
thought
that.
we'd have an episode where Charlotte's defending male power fantasy storytelling, but here we are.
It's
We've
hot.
We've
and
arrived.
It's fun. Like
It's fun. Like, also, just why not just enjoy? It's not hurting anyone. I think by
No,
existing.
look,
it's
it's
not
not
changing the
bad.
world. It's fine.
But this is what's been interesting about these adaptations, because every time we've had a build up to a season where it was like, at first it was Tower of God, right? Then it was God of High School. Then it was obviously Solo Leveling, and there's others in between. There was Noblesse,
Noblesse.
which was dreadful. And just a whole bunch of things where everyone was like, oh my God, like when Tower of God happened, and that's still, I'd argue Tower of God's good, but it's not great, you know?
I actually think that so what's interesting, I think that the actual anime adaptations, it was a bad adaptation of an okay source material. So I think Tower of God is actually good. I like Tower of God. I think it's...
You've read it?
Yeah. I think it's very complicated. And I think that the way I think they haven't figured out how to get for anime in particular, action anime, how to get the pacing of the chapter structure into anime. That's what I think is the issue. That happened with Tower of God. They tried to it's just a very convoluted story and a lot of, like, I don't know.
Lore dumps. A
lot of lore dumps, a lot of flashbacks happen in Webtoon, a lot of that kind of thing. Like, there's a show called Lookism, which actually was probably one of the most successful ones on Netflix, which I had to drop the Webtoon because honestly, every 100 chapters is a new 100-chapter backstory into some character we just met. And it's like, there's too much happening. It's very complicated, very convoluted. And I think Tower of God, great concept, very cool art, very very Hunter x-Hunter-y vibe.
Yeah,
but I'm not sure the adaptation was the strongest. Wonderful soundtrack. Thank you, Kevin Penkin.
Thank you, Kevin Penkin. Amazing soundtrack.
But I think that, we'll see. Yeah, I think it was a pacing issue in the adaptation. I think it's different from Solo Leveling, which is getting quite a good adaptation. Yeah.
I mean, I would say that some of the animation's a bit flat. You know, like it's kind of not as dynamic as I would have hoped from A1. This isn't anything against the manhwa or the webtoon art. I think the art looks amazing. I think it started off pretty well.
Art's
I'd argue,
incredible
I've seen a lot of the art. It looks incredible, but like, it hasn't been a bad. Again, I sound like I'm dunking on Solo Leveling. I'm not actually, like, I watch it every week and I've watched it the whole season. I'm not going to stop. I am totally fine with Solo Leveling, but what I have found was I was the same with God of High School Tournament, the tournament arc, the show, which I was like, yes, hook it to my veins. And then by the end, I was like, what the fuck is going on? Also a poor adaptation. But again, I haven't read I'm assuming it's a poor adaptation. Have you read? No. So, I mean, I'm assuming it's poor. Either it's bad from a source material standpoint or it's a poor adaptation.
I think it's pretty popular. Just, I only found out because of the anime. Like, it just wasn't on my radar beforehand. So might be worth actually reading it. And
I don't think anyone's quite nailed it. I think
it hasn't happened yet.
But I don't know. I think the animation is pretty solid in Solo Leveling. And you know what? If I see someone with like a blue light coming from their eyes, I'm in. A bunch of them have been adapted for the show Josei ones about reincarnation, that kind of thing. Like the Seventh Loop is a memoir, I'm pretty certain. And Dr. Elise is also a memoir. I read that and they're both really good. So like there's just different kind of, I think they just haven't nailed the shonen battle action anime adaptations yet.
Yeah.
And they're hard to do, you know?
Even stuff we love gets slated anyway. Like,
absolutely.
Everyone hated the last Demon Slayer season anyway, so like,
and it was fine.
It was fine.
It just depends on what you're after. Like, and I think, so I would come in to defend Solo Leveling. Yes, I was nearly off it with 7.5. That was...
Well, you were more upset about that than me.
I was so upset about that, but I can forgive it. I haven't even watched the next episode yet because I felt betrayed. So I didn't go back.
Charlotte's part of a Reddit burner account.
I was so upset. But I am intrigued about the guilds and everything. Like, I'm intrigued to see where the story goes.
It's a good first time you tell someone to rise, I'll be like, girls.
Absolutely. And I'm here to see how powerful he can get. You know, I am basic. I like Solo Leveling. Fucking sue me.
So I guess you don't actually read much manga though, do you, anymore, right?
I've read a lot of the classics, and I would if I need to read more manga. But I read manga because it's so accessible for me, and I think it's just like easy to do so, as I said. Like, it's just so I consume a lot of it, and it scratches an itch.
But Graeme, you do read a lot of manga, predominantly on your phone, correct?
I have like maybe 5 or 6 titles I collect physically.
Yes.
Which is really sucks because it's such a long wait time between collating them and releasing them. It's killing me. But yeah, I read a bit on my phone, a bit on my iPad as well, depending.
How do you find the difference between reading manga on your phone versus a webtoon?
Oh, Webtoons is built for it.
Right.
Like, but not all of manhwa is vertical scrolling, but obviously majority of it is now. But I don't know. I always find, especially the manhwa that I read, I always find it's very high production in art and then very little in actual story.
That is very fair.
Like
Art looks incredible.
Like if you've seen Solo Leveling, like half the dialogue in that would not be written on the page because it just isn't. It's just a visual medium.
Right. Okay. So it's much more visual, pure. Okay.
And that's not for everyone. That's,
absolutely.
You know, there are some books that I've read that is, you know, lots of the big words. But a lot of the shonen type stuff is very surface level, very pretty, but just lacking depth.
Interesting.
Which I kind of feel, we'll go back to Solo Leveling, I think that's what really ruins the end of it because there is not enough character development. It is all just hype and flash stuff. So at the end of it, I'm just like, I don't really care about this character, but he does cool stuff.
There's a lot of cool stuff, in fairness. The last episode, which I don't know if you haven't watched, Charlie, but at the time of recording, the last episode was cool. Like,
It's cool.
It's cool. It's stylish. Stylish, definitely.
But I think Manhwa, especially on the Webtoon side, like it's built for 2024. I mean, there's a lot of free manga apps out there. Like literally Shonen has a free manga app. You can read all the manga you want for free on your phone. It's ridiculous. And there are some apps that will, you know, it will show you the panel and you just tap and it takes you to the next panel and it sort of feeds you through the story, which is pretty good.
Right.
But I think physical releases of manga are just better.
One thing is, I will say is interesting. I think a large demographic that I've found has been younger women reading webtoons and manhwa in general. And like the top performing webtoons are often geared towards romance or that kind of thing. So there is that as well. So the number one webtoon is actually written by a New Zealand author. It's called Lore Olympus, and it is beautiful art.
Yeah, beautiful.
Started all right, and then I dropped it. I was so annoyed by that.
That's also a TV show, isn't it?
Well,
or it's becoming a TV show?
Netflix have got the rights to make an animated version. It's a Hades Persephone's retelling. And it's written by a New Zealand author. There's also this other one called Let's Play, which is about to be adapted into an anime, which is an American or a Canadian writer, I believe. And there is, so there's a bunch of a couple, True Beauty is about to be an anime as well, which is a really bad. It got really bad by the end, but it starts really well, and it's also a K-drama that's done incredibly well on Netflix. So there's a lot of those kind of female-led stories and female creators on Webtoon that have done incredibly well. Also interesting, they've done a very smart business move, and in 2022, Wattpad Studios joined with Webtoon. And if people don't know what Wattpad is is
funny to say.
Basically a online writing thing that's sort of like for fan fiction most of the time, but actually there have been many stories that people have written that have been made into Netflix shows, that kind of thing, and they're often rom-com. So they have this deal where someone will write a Wattpad story, they'll license this, and then there'll be a manhwa or a webtoon made of that particular story. A writer is paired with an artist, and then they'll make a story, and they're often kind of really tropey, really trashy romance, and they do quite well. And I'm just I enjoy that they're kind of this is what we do. And I'll read some of the ones that have been adapted into live action, because I think way more successfully than anime, include Sweet Home, which is one I think about zombies from memory. It's quite full on. He's in the building, or is that Hellbound? No. Sweet Home is one he's in the building and the zombies. It's really popular series called Sweet Home. Hellbound, Sound of Magic, All of Us Are Dead, Money Game.
I've heard about that one, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Orange Marmalade, Our Beloved Summer, True Beauty, My Ideas, Gangnam Beauty, Nevertheless, Cheese in the Trap, Yumi Sells, Tomorrow, Odd Girl Out, The Girl Who Smells, My Roommate is a Gumiho, A Man's Man, Hell is Other People, The Girl Downstairs, Golden Spoon, Island, Dr. Frost, and The Sound of Your Heart. So those are just on the Webtoon app that have been adapted for TV. That's a shitload. So it's had live action. Yeah, and that's just on that platform. So one that I would probably recommend watching because it's really fun. There's a lot of reincarnation revenge stories, as in someone finds out that their husband is cheating on them with their best friend, and they have cancer and they die, and they come back 10 years earlier and they plan this elaborate revenge. There's an Amazon Prime series called Marry My Husband, which is based off a webtoon that I read that is the most chaotic revenge story that's so turbo, but I couldn't believe they adapted it, but they did, and it's huge budget on Amazon Prime, and I binged it. I had a great time. So there's a bunch of those revenge stories, Remarried Empress, all this kind of stuff. I wouldn't recommend Remarried. There's ones I actually would recommend that are good. We'll talk about that later though.
Well, why don't we jump into that then, because what are some manhwa and or webtoon that you would recommend to people who haven't seen it, who've never been amongst it, those who are give them a gateway into manhwa or webtoon? I know omniscient readers one you two debate about all the time off mic.
Fucking sucks.
It's better than Solo Leveling.
Oh,
It's way better than Solo Leveling.
oh wow!
Really similar plot, really similar vibe, and both power fantasies, and both similar in a very terms of when I was talking about that device of being able to see a screen and do all this kind of thing. And the difference is though the concept is that this full-time worker, he is addicted to a web novel, which are very popular in Korea as well, and he's the only reader of this really long web novel, and he's been following it for years. And he gets to the final chapter and he's on his way to work on the train. And then as he finishes the final chapter, the train stops and all these portals open and monsters take over. And then he realizes that he's in chapter 1 of the web novel that he's read, and it's happening in real life. And he is aware of the events that are going to happen because he's read the whole novel and nobody else in the whole world has. Only he has. So he has the reader's power, or the viewer's power, or not the protagonist, it's the reader, the author. Yeah. Well, not the author, but he can. He knows what's going to happen. Well, he doesn't know. It's a whole mystery. It's like a mystery tag. Okay. And there are people that
piqued my interest.
But he knows that when he gets up to.
But then you sprinkle in the Hunger Games.
It's sick.
That sounds
sponsors.
Pretty dope.
There's sponsors and that kind of thing, and that
it's too much.
There's sponsors
everyone with a kitchen sink is in there.
It's so good.
It's so much.
You have to get your constellation is sponsors you, and you can get a constellation of the warrior to sponsor you, and they gift you things, and then it's this whole intense thing that happens. And he realizes that when he gets up to a certain chapter or a certain event in the book, he knows he remembers how many people have read it. So there's people that the furthest someone else has read is chapter 70, 100. So he knows some people out who have a similar-ish power, but there's also the protagonist of the story is still there. So he tries to find him, and it's genuinely, it's awesome. I fucking love it. It's sick. It's so convoluted. It is the most convoluted thing that's ever happened, and I live for it. But they're adapting that into live action, and
really,
yeah,
not an anime.
No, they're doing live action movies. It's going to be they're going to have to do 40 movies of this, and I'm going to be watching every single one. I think for romance, there's a couple ones I'd recommend off the top of my head. I would recommend Operation True Love. Good stuff. Cheese in the Trap. It's really good. The one I was talking about before is called Chasing Tails, is a psychological horror, and I really think it'd make a great TV show. Basically, it follows a group of college students. There's about 7 of them who go on an excursion to a film editing building, that a film club at university. And they go at night and they go into the basement to look at, and there's an earthquake and the whole building collapses on them. And they're stuck down there for 2 weeks, I think, or is it 10 days, with only one water bottle in complete darkness. And basically the webtoon opens with them getting pulled out and them now saying this is a homicide case because there's been and all this stuff happens, and basically it's the investigation into what happened down there, and you get flashbacks between all of these characters. You get unreliable narrators, you have the cops doing it, you have the psychologists doing it, and you're what the fuck happened down there? It's great.
That sounds pretty cool.
It's scary though. I remember being I'm actually scared. That was really good. True Beauty's fun, but it absolutely falls off. Let's Play, I really like that one as well. And yeah, there's a bunch. Honestly, I could list them for ages, but I think Chasing Tails is probably my favorite one. And Ghost Bride, real guilty pleasure there. There's so many. I read them all the time, but Operation True Love I'm invested in right now. I would not be surprised. Also, Odd Girl Out is so good. It's such a really great coming of age tale. It's good shit.
Great. What do you got?
We've mentioned Hellbound a few times. I'll chuck Hellbound out there.
Yep.
It's also been, it's like Charlie said, adapted to Netflix. So it's kind of people basically wake up one day and have a vision about how they're going to die, and they have a certain amount of time before they're going to die. And then when that timer runs out, their free beings present themselves to them and just basically murder them horribly. But it's only sort of really caught the attention of the media and the police and stuff like that, and it's them trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And then there's cults involved, and it's this whole horror, psychological mystery type thing going on. That's real fun. The Boxer, really good sports manhwa.
Ooh, about a boxer, I assume.
About a boxer. Yeah, it's very similar to that. What was that
Megalobox.
No. The older
Hajime no Ippo.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Yes.
Very, very similar sort of vibe of an everyday man going up against like geniuses and heroes and monsters and just being a good boxer.
But a little bit supernatural.
Yeah, a little bit of that, but it's more about like the mentality and the physicality about it. I mean, monster in the sense of like, an average guy fighting Mike Tyson, like not actual like I'm a dragon man.
Damn,
it's not Ultimate Muscle. Where are my Ultimate Muscle heads at? Yeah.
That actually sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's a good read.
Proper sports style.
Yeah. A lot of technique of like you sort of learn how to like dodge a punch and roll, and there's like. Yeah, and very interesting art style as well. If you want to go back to like a classic, like OG, The Breaker, which is kind of, it's like about a kid who gets picked on at school, then his substitute teacher who comes to school takes him under his wing and sort of, he's a wanted man, but he knows like this notorious fighting style of like Nine Arts Dragon and sort of trains him.
Right.
That's like 2007. That's, for such a young medium, that's like a throwback OG. That was really good, and that's one of those manhwas that you actually read like a Western comics, so it's pre-Webtoon type of stuff. Or maybe not pre-Webtoon, but more of a classic style. Yeah, read Solo Leveling.
Yep.
Guess, read Omniscient Reader.
Do it. I dare you.
Beginning at the End is pretty good as well. That's kind of like a reincarnation story mixed with like Harry Potter. Yeah, there's a few out there.
A few out there.
If AI Ruled the World is a good one as well.
Okay.
That's more like short stories in manhwa form about like different stories about how AI can affect the world and stuff. That's pretty fun. There's real good stuff out there. You just have to wade through the power fantasy stuff.
There's so much shit.
And villainous.
Yeah.
Boy, will I read all of them. And often forget that I have and then be like, I've fully read this. Your Throne is a good one. I think it's fallen off a bit in the last bit, but Your Throne's a great fantasy thing about two girls who keep swapping bodies who are like rivals. It's really good. Like fantasy revenge story. Good stuff.
There's another good martial arts one, but I can never. I read like 20 chapters of it and then just lost it.
Is it Lookism?
No. Oh, it's The Legend of the Northern Blade.
Oh yes, very famous one.
You'd like that. That's
Yeah.
really good. So it's about like a mountain kingdom that gets taken over, but the son is allowed to live, but he's not allowed to like leave the ruins of the kingdom. But while he's there, he sort of learns this secret martial arts that they all sort of did, and then it's kind of like a revenge tale, Journey to the West type vibe.
Okay.
That one was
That
pretty
sounds
damn
sick.
good. Yeah, that was pretty good.
Lookism, which is a Netflix adapted anime as well, as a webtoon, is about a bullied high school student who is he's kind of just bullied. He's a little bit overweight and gets bullied for that, and his appearance in general. And he one day develops this ability where he just like wakes up and he has basically two different bodies, and his other body is this like really tall, handsome, like very physically strong guy, and he like when he falls asleep he switches between the two, and it's about like lookism, and that's what I thought it was gonna be like an interesting kind of take on
It's like the Nutty Professor.
yeah, it's like it's all about like how people treat you differently if you fit a beauty standard and everything like that. But then it really quickly turned into like teen delinquent gangs fighting each other. Which is fine as well. It just they really like to the point where I wonder if the other body has even made an appearance recently, like. Because I just don't. I wonder if they just dropped that concept and the other guy's just asleep in a room. Like, his actual body. Everyone's like, I'll give you the fighting hot guy. So I think it kind of, unfortunately, the messaging is a little bit mixed.
Yeah.
But hey, I dropped it pretty quickly, so I could be really wrong. Lookism stands. Let me know in the comments.
Anything else you want to add about manhwa?
No, I just think they're like such different. I think that the thing that is interesting is there's a really growing platform. I think there's a couple of issues with, apparently, in terms of writing, as in being a mangaka is awful as well, but apparently the digital, the scroll takes longer than doing pages because it's like you have to do.
I can imagine so.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of pressure for creators to get it out, and I think there's a lot of underpaid overtime, unfortunately, for artists in any kind of industry. I think there's a lot of issues with that. It's important to note. I just think it's a cool way for me to consume some comics, basically. And I like that there are international creators. Like I was reading one I was reading called The Guy Upstairs is an author from Indonesia. Like there's like, so you'll be reading something, you'll be like, oh, this is actually Korean. This is, from somewhere else entirely.
yeah.
Number 1, Lore Olympus is huge.
It's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
It looks gorgeous.
Great looking book.
But yeah.
Well, there you have it. That is our episode on manhwa / webtoons. Something slightly different, but again, we're seeing a lot more adaptations of these. We're seeing a lot more transnational. Again, a perfect example of the fact that New Zealander is the number 1 selling artist on Webtoons, a Korean platform. Like it's so interesting how much transnationalism is happening, cross borders, globalism happening all the time. And again, with these interesting anime adaptations.
One other really fascinating one is that Let's Play is getting an anime adaptation. It's American or Canadian novel on a Korean platform that's getting a Japanese animated adaptation.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
But again, there's so much of this happening, and it's so interesting because again, it's like that age-old question of like, what is anime? Which is something we talk about all the time. Obviously, you know, the basic example is animated content made in Japan. But the term is starting to get broader. And it's so interesting to see, especially with all the influences and how much influence happens across borders, how much, you know, Avatar: The Last Airbender, obviously not an anime. We've spoken about that a lot. But it's just so interesting to see how much things influence other nations and and how storytelling can be the same but different. It just fascinates me endlessly. And I think that's why manhwa is so interesting. And again, also why I don't think we've seen a successful adaptation yet of a manhwa into anime. I don't think it's not going to happen. And again, that's a relative term. Like there has been successes, but we haven't seen the smash hit that we're all expecting. It wasn't Tower of God, hasn't been Solo Leveling. Solo Leveling did have the biggest ever debut on Crunchyroll. Huge. But it has dropped off rather precipitously since. However, you'd still chalk it up as a massive success. Like it's been a success, but it hasn't been like a Demon Slayer or anything like that, you know. And maybe that was never going to be the case, but a lot of people in anticipation of these being made thought that it would. It's just interesting that it hasn't happened yet. But such an interesting world. Hit us up with your favorite manhwa and or webtoons. If you haven't been into it at all, take some of Charlie and Graham's recommendations. I will have to do so because again, it's just not a world that I only get across it when I start hearing about them being adapted into anime. Thank you so much for listening. We always appreciate it. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to our social media platforms, which are, of course, TikTok and Instagram. If you're watching us on YouTube, great. If you are a podcast listener, you can go and give us a review on one of Apple Podcasts or Spotify. 5 stars help us out massively. If you want to write a little note, a nice one, that'll help us out massively too. It really does make a difference. If you really like what we're doing, you can of course find us on Patreon, early release episodes, behind the scenes footage, and a special episode every fortnight. Really means a lot to us. Charlie, Graham, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to chat about interesting things with y'all, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks very much.